Good evening. I'm Bev Smith. Along with my piano man, Hilton Felton, welcome to Our Voices. The day after Christmas. Was it a Merry Christmas for you? Did you have all the family around? I know you did. And right now, you're settling back with your feet up on the couch going, what's Bev going to do for me now? Well, what we're going to do for you is mellow you down, tell you some stories. Remember what it was like when you were restless and you couldn't get started? Grandma told you a story, Daddy told you a story, Mommy told you a story. Well, this evening on Our Voices, we're going to tell you some stories, and you're going to love these stories. Come meet the storytellers. They are homeboy, that's what I like to say, Dr. Larry Coleman. He's a professor of communications at Gallaudet University. LaWanda Randall, a storyteller. She's got lots of stories to tell. Some we can tell on the air and some we can't. And then there's Bobby Norfolk, who is a storyteller, who is fascinating within himself. He used to be a national park ranger. Now he's a storyteller. So tell us a story. And so it begins, this day after Christmas, stories.
This is a story from Ghana, West Africa, and it's simply called Anansi the Spider and His 6 Sons. You see, once there was a spider called Anansi. And Anansi had 6 sons. His first son was called Sea Trouble. Sea Trouble. That's because he had psychic powers and he could see trouble a long way off. Second son was called Road Builder. Road Builder. He could build roads into the forest. Third son was called River Drinker. River Drinker. He could drink a river bone dry. But next of Anansi's sons was called Game Skinner. Game Skinner. He didn't play games. He skinned wild animals in the forest. But next of Anansi's sons was simply called Stone Thrower. Stone Thrower. And last of sons was called Cushion, because he was soft. Well, one morning, Anansi woke up very early. His sons were still asleep. Anansi thought that he would go for a walk into the forest before his sons awakened. So he went to the bathroom, washed his hands, washed his face. He opened the front door, and outside he went. Woo! Anansi came to a deep, wide river in the forest. He was thirsty from all of that walking, so he thought he would take a drink from the river. But he started slipping into the mud. He tried to back up, but he slipped down the hill. Whoa! Splash! And fell into the river. And then a big fish came by and swallowed Anansi up. No more Anansi. But as soon as that happened back at home, his son Sea Trouble knew it. He said, Father's in trouble, Father's in trouble, Father's in trouble. We have to go help Father. So the 6 sons jumped up, and off they went to save Father Anansi. Road Builder got in front because Road Builder knew how to build the road into the forest. He intuitively knew in his mind exactly which way to build that road. So the other 5 sons were right behind him. Go, Road Builder, go. But when they got to the deep, wide river, they had to stop. Sea Trouble looked in the river. He said, Father's inside the fish. The fish has swallowed Father. Quick, River Drinker. River Drinker ran over to the bank of the river and took a big drink. No more river. And now Game Skinner jumped up, ran down to the bottom of the riverbed. Game Skinner grabbed that fish, took his sharp legs, sliced that fish's belly open. He filleted that fish right open, and Anansi crawled out of the fish's belly. But more trouble came right after that, because up in the sky was Falcon. Falcon was flying around that morning, and Falcon looked down and saw Anansi, and Falcon said, breakfast time. So Falcon flew out of the sky as fast as he could. He grabbed Anansi in his talons and took off with him. Stone Thrower stopped Falcon. Stone Thrower looked on the ground, found a big rock. Falcon released Anansi. He started falling. cushion, stop father from falling. Cushion got up. Whoa! Anansi landed on top of cushion and was saved. And they were very happy now, that spider family. And they went back home and they had cake, juice, and ice cream. And they ate and drank and they danced. And they ate and drank and they danced. And they ate and drank and they danced. And they ate and drank and they over-partied. But not Anansi. Anansi wasn't tired, yet he was still bored with the night. So Anansi decided to walk back out at night. But this night, when Anansi walked outside, he passed by a big bush. And in the center of that bush, there was a round ball of glowing light. Anansi said, "A round ball of glowing light? I wonder who that could belong to." So Anansi parted the branches, took the white ball of glowing light out. Wow! He said, "I know what? I will give this to the sun that saved my life today." But which one saved my life? Since Anansi could not figure it out, he called on the spirit of the forest, Yame. Yame, Yame, Yame. And a big cloud appeared in the spirit of the forest. Yame came down. Boof. Yes, Anansi. Anansi said, "I have found a white ball of glowing light in the bush, and I would love to give it to the sun that saved my life today. But until I can figure out which one did it, would you hold this for me?" "Yes," Anansi said, Yame. So Yame held the white ball of glowing light for Anansi. Anansi went home, woke his sons up, and all that day they argued about who saved him. They argued and debated and debated and argued. 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 And Yame heard them arguing and debating too. And he was very much displeased. So, instead of giving back the white ball of glowing light to Anansi, Yame just held on to it and waited for nightfall to come. And when nighttime came, Yame took that white ball of glowing light and put it into the nighttime sky. And that light will be there tonight.
The day after Christmas are just kind of mellowing out in the nice way, in the storytelling way. And we are talking to storytellers. That was fantastic. You know, as you were telling the story, I looked at the people in the studio. They're not little kids. Well, maybe Hilton, but they're not little kids. They're adults. And they were, you know, what's going to happen next? Anansi's going to be lost, you know. And I was doing that myself. So it suggests to me that storytelling is not just for the young.
It didn't start out that way at all. It's an adult pastime for the most part. If you look at first cultures, you'll notice that it's adults sitting around telling stories, children listening, learning how to do it, but it's an adult pastime for the most part.
And was it because there were no TVs, Larry?
Yeah, I think you had traditions of people sort of entertaining each other, utilizing their imagination, all sorts of purposes. One of the purposes was for kids, and that purpose was to teach kids wisdom. So you had bits and pieces of wisdom that came from the stories. Anansi's story, the character Anansi, is a character of the trickster. And the trickster is able to cross all sorts of different boundaries and to become different things and to get out of mischief and get out of difficult situations. That teaches a kid how to get out of difficult situations. The adults sitting around listening to what the kids were learning were revisiting their own childhood and experiences, and their imagination also was working. So that's one of the other aspects of it. And television today kind of fills part of that, but the imagination is the part that you don't get to work, because you see the image that the producer or the filmmaker wants you to see and not the image that you can see yourself.
But you know what, you raise an interesting point. When I think of storytelling, until you said it, I never really thought about television, but you're right. It does justify our passion for the story, because when we watch television, that's why soaps are so popular. We are watching stories. So basically, we adults love a good story. Now, let me tell you about Anansi. It seemed to me, if we're talking about what was learned, that Anansi always ventured places where he had no business going.
But that's not just a child's thing. Adults do that all the time. They're always venturing someplace where they have no business being. The wisdom that's being told in the stories is as much for adults, and sometimes more so for adults, because nobody can go to you and say to you, you know, you was really silly, you know, for doing whatever that was. But if I tell you a story, I can tell you in a nice way that you were silly.
Yeah. And you'll accept that.
And you'll accept that.
I don't know. Okay.
Well, you can always pretend it wasn't you.
There's a tradition in every culture. First of all, has storytelling, has folklore that relates to stories. Man loves a good story, so it's a human thing, adults or kids, okay? But there's also a tradition, if you look at like Jewish storytelling, for example, the old rabbis and the priests were great storytellers. They teach their people all the wisdom and do the same thing. The thing is that people can't always accept the truth crystal clear and naked. So there's even a story about that where Truth was trying to go around and tell people, and people couldn't deal with him because he was naked. But he went to visit the castle of Parable, and Parable said, let me give you some clothes, and put these clothes on, and wear these slippers, and have music coming out of your cap. And all of a sudden, people will come and listen to you. The same truth covered up now with all these beautiful things, and that's the story that man loves to hear, that he didn't want to hear before.
But you know, this is the day after Christmas, and on Christmas we celebrate the birth of a great storyteller, Jesus Christ. He was able to charm his audience with parables, which are nothing but stories, right?
Exactly. And the Bible is the story in the Bible. It's called the greatest story ever told.
Yes, of course it is. You teach us about passing on the wisdom?
Yeah, it's wisdom and secrets. And so when you say Jesus Christ and the parables of Jesus, they had secrets, and different people could hear them at their own level. You didn't hear everything if you weren't a believer or as much of a believer as someone else. So that's part of it. And there are messages and secrets and wisdom pieces in different stories, buried even in the story that we heard earlier.
Yeah.
One is what I call social power stories that I get from a group called the Efficacy Institute, where they go around and they use storytelling in different cities to train and develop black kids, teach them how to handle obstacles and difficulties. And there's a story about a mule. In this situation, there was an evil farmer, and this farmer was trying to kill this mule. He decided that he was jealous of the other farmer's possession, so he wanted to kill his prize-winning mule. So what he did was he dug a hole deep, about 6 feet by 7 by 3 feet wide, and he lured the mule in and pushed the mule down. When the mule was in there, this evil farmer started shoveling dirt on his back, and it would be on his shoulders. But when the mule felt this dirt, he would shake it off like that, and then he would stomp down like that, and he would shake it off and stomp it down. He continued to do that as the farmer continued to shovel all of this dirt on his back until he started to rise up by packing the dirt in. He shook it off and stomped down and shook it off and rose up. And he was angry about the situation, but he got out of the hole. The idea was, and the way we tell the story, he really didn't do anything to the farmer because he was a proud mule. He went off and won another prize. If you have obstacles in your life, or oppression in your life, or dirt that somebody throws on your back, what you do is figure out a way to shake it off, stomp it down, and rise up and get stronger and smarter to a higher level. And that teaches how to deal with obstacles.
That's a beautiful, beautiful story. But what is not so beautiful is the lost art of storytelling. It was the African way. It was brought here to America when we were brought over on the slave ships to tell stories. But if I look at the 80s, we didn't tell stories to our kids, and what we did tell them in the way of stories were very violent. Where has the storytelling gone?
That's an interesting question, because with Anansi the Spider, for example, it teaches personal responsibility, first of all. And the personal responsibility is teamwork and cooperation. And a lot of the kids and adults that hear this will hear inherently teamwork and cooperation got Anansi the Spider saved. And then when they couldn't get their act together at the end, it all fell apart. And so that white ball of light was not given to them, but actually given to everyone. So even in defeat, there's victory. But when you look at Mother Goose, it seems like almost every Mother Goose rhyme and all the nursery rhymes end with some sort of violence. London Bridge is falling down about the Black Plague. Jack and Jill went up the hill. All of a sudden they come tumbling down. Jack busts his crown. Even Rockabye Baby in the treetop. The bough break Humpty Dumpty. And so
But
it's
this is
always
another way
violence.
of responding to what's happening at the time, that people express what they're going through their stories, that this is another way of looking at the society at the time. And we're looking at Mother Goose from this vantage point, but then it was seen differently.
But
it was another way of saying truths with clothes on.
For that period
For
of
that
time.
period.
Okay.
It was a safe way of getting across the story that people were dissatisfied.
But it seems to me, and I'm picking up on what you say, that for children today, there is a lot of violence. So a lot of people are beginning to debate whether or not we should use the traditional stories or whether we should do something. How do you feel? I mean, in other words, it's politicizing.
The traditional stories, there's always two sides to it. There's always the evil side, and there's a side where you'll see evil issues to teach you how to deal with evil and that evil is real. What LaWanda's saying is important, that this art reflects life. There's always another side. There's also, because we talked about wisdom, it also teaches you. There are also some positive, just fun experiences where the stories just entertain and they don't have bad messages. So there's always two sides to the stories, as there are two sides in life.
Right. And you're bringing up another point that I personally make, and that's this, is that we don't tell children the ugly stepmother stories anymore. We don't tell them the Red Riding Hood story where the wolf actually does eat the grandmother.
Yes.
We don't do that anymore. And we used to do it in the home, which was a non-threatening situation, environment where the child could deal with that violence in a loving manner. And I contend that that kind of thing shows up in Chainsaw Massacre, that children need to deal with violence in any form. It's there. That's a fact of life.
So what do we need to be doing? Telling them stories that will show victory over that lifestyle?
We need to give them the black and the white. It has to be cut and dried. They need to be able to see that. When we're to when we whitewash.
That's acceptable term.
Exactly.
Even at BET.
When we whitewash a story,
Or when we try to make it what it isn't.
when we try to make it what it isn't, it loses the impact. There's a reason for those stories being as violent as they are, because people need to deal with these things. This is the evil side of people. We have that.
You have another story about the whooping preacher?
Yeah. But I think that's kind of a sheer entertainment story. Many times, as I said earlier, the preacher is a storyteller, and preachers use their sermons to inject stories that teach and empower the people in the congregations. Sometimes the preacher is a subject of stories as well. In this particular story, it was it's a story kind of exaggeration. There was a famous preacher named Jackson, Reverend Jackson. And he was known as a whooping preacher all over the world. He had a reputation as a whooping preacher. As a matter of fact, there was one situation in Mobile, Alabama, where he whooped for 3 days.
What's hoop?
Hoop is kind of a talking and singing.
Well,
yeah.
Calling on the give me a little whoop.
Okay.
So that's right. The Temptations have a version of that word, but preachers say he hooped when he really preached, and he got a rhythm, and he got a little song, and he talked like this, whoa. So this situation was this famous whooping preacher was preaching about Job one Sunday, and there was a woman who came to his church who was a Catholic, and she was raised in the Catholic Church, and they didn't hoop in the Catholic Church. The priests, the most they did was that kind of thing, dominos. They wouldn't really sing song and get down and wave handkerchiefs and stuff. So this particular preacher hooped about the story of Jesus all morning, and the story of Job as well was involved in there. And what she thought was kind of unusual was how he kept on hooping even at the door when he was shaking hands with the people as they were going out. So he said, "Young lady, I'm so glad you came to my church this afternoon. And oh, I want you to know that you're welcome to come and have dinner with me and my wife and my daughter too." And she thought it was strange, but she went anyway. And all the way home, he kept on hooping in the car, right? And when they got there, they opened the door, and it turned out that his wife hooped too. So they opened the door, and the wife said, my, come right in, young lady. Sit right down here. We're getting ready to have dinner. Oh, she told her what the dinner was, fried chicken, cornbread, and so forth. And it so happened that the daughter was seated at the table, and she hooped too. And the daughter had kind of a James Brown hoop. And see, she said, "Please, please, please, please pass the potato salad. Oh, can I have some of that hot sauce?" At that point, the dog came upstairs from the basement. He was hungry, and he was hooping too. So he said, "Bow, wow, wow, bow, wow, 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 ruff, ruff, ruff." So the story could go on and on and on, you see, with the exaggeration.
All I want to know is, did the Catholic lady ever do the hoop?
Or did she do the Gregorian chant?
I think she may have split after that.
Because she didn't understand.
Right.
And we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back. Can I have a tune, Hilton? The day after Christmas, and we're telling stories. Along with our storytellers, we're going to be joined very shortly by something special. But let me reintroduce you to our storytellers. Dr. Larry Coleman is a communications professor at Gallaudet University, and that university is for the deaf. We're going to meet some deaf storytellers in a moment. LaWanda Randall is a storyteller. We haven't heard from her yet. We will. And the man that started us off, I love this, a national park ranger, now a storyteller. Your mama's proud of you, child?
I guess.
Sure she is, sure she is. What made you decide to be a storyteller?
Well, it's interesting because as a child, I was a stutterer. I stuttered terribly, and I was a wallflower to boot. And yes, by 1968, I got into high school drama. And from drama, that led from one thing into another, into poetry, and then into political satire. Eventually, that led into journalism. So I became a journalist for a while, worked for 3 newspapers in St. Louis. And from that, I got to go on to college to become a history major, eventually becoming a park ranger. And then,
Which has no flow at all.
I know. This is not all happening one at a time, it's concurrently. But eventually, as a park ranger at the Arch in St. Louis, I found that storytelling was alive and well in the South. In Tennessee, where the Mecca seemed to start in 1972, a group of storytellers in St. Louis decided to have a storytelling festival, and the site they chose was right where I worked at, the Gateway Arch. So I didn't seek storytelling, it sought me.
And how did you become a storyteller?
Well, it started a long time ago. When I was born, my mother used to talk to me constantly and tell me everything, stories and whatnot. And so that I grew up listening to stories, and as quickly as I could talk, I told. Got into a lot of trouble for telling, but I told, and it kept doing it and doing it and doing it until finally somebody paid me to do something, and took off from there.
And you've been telling it ever since.
Telling ever since.
And finally, a professor of communications at Gallaudet University, which is a college for the deaf. And you tell stories.
Right, it's very appropriate in that environment because deaf culture is very visual and gestural, and black storytellers use a lot of gestures, as you saw earlier, movement and so forth. 60% of American Sign Language is gesture, so it's great. I think most people are storytellers anyway. They love when they're sitting around chatting. If they're performing in front of a group, they're a storyteller. I have that interest and have always had a kind of passion to perform, so I do it with teaching, I do it with training, I do it with all sorts of things in my work. But the deaf culture is very much connected, and that's why I enjoy working with some of my students in one class, which is a storytelling as communication class.
We're going to meet one of your students, right?
Mm-hmm.
Daisy Wooten?
Daisy.
And Daisy will be telling us a story, and Greg Haratos will be telling us what she's telling us.
Interpreting.
Interpreting is called.
Right.
Okay. So let's begin with the story. And let's meet Daisy. Don't be shy.
Hello. Okay. This is called The Man Who Could Fly. A long time ago, black people in Africa were on the other side of the world from America. And people from America came over on the roads. I'm sorry, I just lost it.
But you can do it. Tell her she can do it. She's doing just fine. How do I sign? You're doing fine. Fine. Yeah, you're doing fine. Go ahead and tell the story. Hilton messes up
Long
every
ago,
night. We keep him.
black people in Africa were musicians, artists, children, mothers, fathers, witch doctors. In other countries all across the world, people came in boats and came to Africa and snatched up the people, all of them, and brought them back to their home country. There was a long journey on boats that they got back to there. One day, one hot, blistering day, the sun was beating down on a pregnant woman working hard in the fields. There was a large plantation she worked on. The sun burned her. An overseer rode over a white man, and the woman said that she was sick and tired. The overseer said, "Get back to work." She almost was at the point of fainting. She was so tired. The white man was angry, and he came up to her and said, "Come on, get back to work, you lazy woman, get back to work." But she explained that she was just about to faint. He pulled out his whip and whipped her, and she fell. Other people around who were working the fields as well were shocked and looked at her. And the woman tried her hardest to get back up. The overseer said, "See what I've done to her? The same will be your treatment if you don't get back to work." They all went back to work, hoeing the fields. A witch doctor got up and he saw. Unhappy with the situation, he was watching what was going on and went over to that woman and spoke to her. And he said something to her. And whatever he said made her float through the air. She didn't know what to do. She'd never floated before. So she flew off. And the witch doctor felt proud seeing the woman flying away to freedom. There was other problems, and other people fell. Another woman fell, and the witch doctor came over and dealt with her, and she too floated in the air. The overseer started wondering what was going on. People were disappearing out of the fields, and they were gone, and he thought, that man, he must be the one. He laughed. So he came over and was definite that that was the person who was causing the trouble. He was laughing, and as the man laughed, he called them all, and everyone flew into the sky back home to Africa.
This is the way you applaud.
Oh, this is the way you
This is the way you
applaud.
applaud in the deaf community because they can't hear, but they
So
can
you
see
do
your
this
hands.
to
Yeah.
applaud.
Right.
Another story from another student. This is Georgia Edwards, and her interpreter will be Breen Marsha. I think she's going to do just fine.
Should I begin?
Yes.
The name of the story is Amen. An owner had a horse, and he loaned it to a person. And he said, "Do you know how to use my horse? Do you know how to ride?" He said, "No, I don't." So he said, "Okay, when you want the horse to stop, say Amen. Praise the Lord means go." He said, "Oh, okay, I've got it." He said, "Stop, I say Amen, and go, I say, praise the Lord, right? He said, right, good luck. So off he rode. He rode through the wilderness. He rode and he smelled the flowers and the wind in his hair. He rode through the trees and the meadow. He enjoyed himself. And then he found that he was riding up a cliff. And he was getting closer and closer to the edge of the cliff. It was a beautiful country, but he couldn't remember. How do I get this horse to stop? I'm near the edge. What was that word? What was that word? Couldn't remember. Stop. What was it? What was it? What was it? Was it? Oh, amen. Oh, praise the Lord.
I've done that a lot, you know.
You were praising the Lord.
I was praising the Lord, went right over the cliff. Didn't pay any attention to the signs. That was wonderful. That was wonderful. And so that's what you teach at the school.
Well, in the class, we explore the whole culture in relationship to storytelling and performing stories in different ways. And part of that is just they do this every day. I mean, they share stories all the time. Some personal stories and some traditional stories.
So you have a class full of all kinds of students from every ethnic background. You hear a lot of great stories.
Yeah, we do. There are Asian students, African students, students from Canada, Black American, White American, all cultures. And it's a small class, but we have many, many visiting performers and professors who are deaf, who share stories and teach about gestures and hand shapes and all kinds of things. It's something that really is different, and we need to know more about it because it's so visual and it's so beautiful. It goes well with television and visual media.
This was wonderful, wasn't it? But you know, when you looked at them and how she was talking about the man riding on the horse, I flashed back to when Bobby was telling his story and the falcon was flying. And I was saying to myself as I watched, there's really not that much difference. We can all talk to each other. Maybe what it takes. You think Gorbachev should tell Bush a story and that'll make it work?
Probably did.
They probably did. They probably did. They probably did. So storytelling is a way of passing the culture along.
It's also a way of what you just implied is bringing different cultures together. So if you have an individual, and I don't care what culture, how different they are than you, people enjoy and make friends over stories, just like over a meal, sharing information, a personal experience. It tells me about yourself. When they do signed stories, it tells them about their culture, themselves, or sometimes it's just for fun, for entertainment. But it's a very powerful medium. It's a very powerful tool for doing a lot of things related to the development of the person and self-identity and establishment. Man loves a good story.
Absolutely. Have you seen children who are changed or adults when you sit down to begin to tell them stories, they come in one way and walk out another?
I've seen groups all over the United States where 300 children would be in a gymnasium seated, and afterwards the teachers would come up to me and say, I had no idea these many children could sit still for 45 minutes.
Yeah, it's wonderful to
And
watch.
pandemonium not break out. So there's this thing called storyteller's hypnosis. And you just lose track of time and space when you really get into the plot of the story and you have no concept of what's going on around you. You're just following the story. And this is how these children can remain silent, and they don't need a Nintendo.
Or some chemical to make them quiet down.
Yes.
We'll take a break, and when we come back, yes, LaWanda will tell us stories, because there are all kinds of stories. Fairy tales, fables. We'll learn about them right after this. Ding dong, the bells are ringing. It's the day after Christmas, and we're telling stories and having a good time doing it. We hope you're enjoying our special holiday show. Now, there are all kinds of stories. There are myths, and what's a myth?
basically something that people think is true, but they're not quite sure, from my interpretation.
It's also an old tradition, long time ago, like Odysseus and some of the old stories that you're not sure, like he said, not sure, but it has all kinds of wisdom and experiences that teach us, like fairy tales, and we see it over and over again. We hear it over and
The myth.
over.
Right.
Yeah, the myth.
Do you know a story that falls into the category of a myth?
Oh, I know a lot of them, but were you looking for one right now?
No,
I mean,
you haven't told us a story.
I haven't told you a story. The kind of story I like to tell, more than myths, are ones that people understand why something is the way it is, but it's much more fun to make up a story about it.
Okay.
And one of those involves a big barnyard party, where all animals in the barnyard were invited to come along, and the turkey and the geese and the ox and all the rest of them were going off to this barnyard supper and dance. And everybody went along, and they had to go a long way to get there, and even for as long as they could go, they could see way off in the distance tables heaped high with food. Now, by the time they got there, though, they looked at the table and they found that it seemed to be just piles and piles and piles of cornbread. And the rooster was along with them, and he drew himself up and got all puffed up and started talking all this stuff about, look, I could go back home and eat cornbread. I don't have to stay here and eat cornbread. And he walked on off and went on back. Well, you know how your mother tells you that if you don't eat what's put in front of you, you can't be hungry. Everybody else was hungry. So they ate the cornbread, and they ate, and pretty soon began to find that underneath the cornbread there was ham hocks and greens. And they ate that and found that there was candied sweet potatoes under that. They ate that and found that there was cakes and pies under that. Well, word got back to the rooster what was going on, but of course he was too proud to take back everything he'd said, so he couldn't get anything to eat. Now he learned a lesson. And he learned it real good. And you know, because now whatever farm you go to, whatever hen yard you go to, if you see a rooster, you will notice that if you give him any food, he'll scratch at it. Eat a little bit, scratch at it, and keep on scratching till he gets to the bottom.
Looking for those candy sweet potatoes. And there are lessons to be learned, because while you were telling the story, don't let the first impression fool you.
Absolutely.
Look at something. Investigate it. Find out before you make up your mind. And so when you're telling this story, little kids are learning. See, I keep saying little kids, but I'm learning too.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody does. It's
Yes, I think the concept of storytelling that we have grown up with was that it's quiet time, right after 12 o'clock lunch, and you're sitting down ready to take a nap, and the teacher sits down, or the librarian, once upon a time,
But
just
that's
before
not,
you doze off.
no,
But that is
that's not the reality
genre.
at all. All of a sudden, and you'll find that your mother's at the sink washing dishes, and something about the suds will remind her of something that went on. She'll tell you a story about herself as a child. She will tell you something else about somebody else, and then another person will come along and add. And soon you're all sitting around telling stories. The dishes are not getting done, but everybody's having a good time. They're sharing stories.
That was something that African American people did all the time. Are we still doing it? Because I can just see my mother at the sink cooking, saying, you know, Beverly, when I was a little girl, my grandmother showed me how to make bread this way. And there was this time when I was making bread, and now that story is me. And then when I do that, I say to my daughter, you know, Mommy told me that when she was making bread, but I don't hear kids talking about things that their parents told them.
My daughters, who are now 16 and 17, the 17-year-old about 4 years ago wrote an A paper about her grandmother's kitchen, which is where we all sit around and tell stories. And it's been going on in our family for a very long time, and people don't realize that they are telling stories. They don't call it that, but that's what's going on. It is going on in a lot of families. And I'd say more than we are aware of, just because people don't know that they're
And because
doing
we
it.
don't put a formal title on it.
Exactly.
We
We
don't
call
say it's storytelling time now.
We call it different things. We call it, family stories, talking, tell me some of the things that grandmother used to say. Sometimes in the South, they telling lies. You hear,
Shooting the breeze.
Oh, yeah, telling
Exactly,
lies.
telling lies.
Yeah.
Exactly,
There's
telling
lots
lies.
of different old expressions for it, but I don't think Afro-Americans do it enough. We're part of an oral tradition. We come from an oral tradition in African culture, which really celebrates, and it celebrates in the music, it celebrates in many of the songs, and the rap songs are a
Or
version
storytelling,
and
yeah.
a variant of
Exactly,
it because of the
exactly.
significance of the word. The word is important. For the deaf students, the sign, the word, the symbol, the image is important. We see it, we hear it all the time in the churches and among the preachers. So it's still alive, but we need to do it more. Turn off the television set sometimes, turn the television down if it's BET sometimes.
What
And
is he talking about?
Just turn the sound
That's not
down
a good
and just watch
story
the
to
picture.
tell. Don't turn BET down.
But one of the problems, or not problems, but one of the things that keeps us from doing it is the culture we live in. This is a very literate culture. And there's a book, Dry Long So, and there's a story in it that I'd like at some point to be able to tell.
Tell it now.
Well, there's an old woman in it who starts out as, why is it that white folks think that just because it's in a book, it's so? For instance, if I had a recipe and I'd followed that recipe 2-3 times and it didn't come out, now wouldn't you begin to suspect the recipe? Why, this old woman that I used to work for, she was making biscuits, and every time she did that recipe, she would tell me, Irma, I just can't make it so. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Now, if you was following and you can read, wouldn't you eventually say something is wrong with that recipe? But part of it, this is I haven't worked on it as much as I'd like to, but the point that I'm making in this is that we get away from being told how to do something, and we look at the piece of paper and we say, it's got to be so because here it is. And I'm not denigrating reading, because I believe that storytelling is the first step to learning to read. That
But you could take that story and do a lot with
Work
it.
wonders with it.
All right,
Oh,
do
yeah.
something with that story. Now, the
Because-
old,
Impromptu storytelling.
and get ready.
Story.
You're next. All right, so LaWanda started us. This woman saying, and it makes a lot of sense. Can't you just hear somebody saying, now, if the recipe didn't turn out right, why would she keep following the recipe? You're on.
Because Betty Crocker said that it was right. And if Betty Crocker said it was right, then it had to be right. But what she probably didn't realize that it was a typographical error in the book.
And it's your turn.
And what was she going to produce? Maybe she was going to produce something that would be miraculous, that would be so fantastic that anybody coming to the house would be able to eat it and get wisdom and grow and learn and become whatever they wanted to become. They could become people who were masters of the universe, right?
But how are you going to be masters of the universe when the reason the woman could not make these biscuits was because she's used to taking a can and hitting it on the side of the counter and peeling back when, now that ain't a biscuit.
No, it's not. And she's probably listening for somebody to say, hungry, hungry dad. The woman probably couldn't cook.
Yeah, she probably couldn't cook. So if you were at her house, what you did was you called up the pizza parlor and asked for the pizza man to deliver some food, right? Because those biscuits might have been too hard for you.
Lord, talk about hard biscuits.
Hard biscuits.
Let me tell you about hard biscuits.
What it sounds like, this sounds like my father and my mother's cousin, Uncle Esther, in the kitchen when they from work. And there were 6 of us. We would wait for them to come home from work. My father was a construction worker, and my Uncle Lester worked at the steel mill, J&L. And when he came home from work, he would tell a lie on my father. You know that, don't you, Uncle Lester? And Daddy would tell a lie on Uncle Lester. And we would sit there and wait for those lies to be told.
And
that's what this was. This was nothing but passing it on and on and on. I hate to think that that is dying. How do we get it back?
Well, actually, I think it is coming back in the schools. A lot of educators are bringing the it's not just, it also teaches cognitive skills, it teaches literary skills, it teaches do with the imagination and how the kids can learn to
Just like
listen,
to
creative
listen.
listening,
Exactly. That
which we've lost
of
terribly.
how to listen for the meat of what's going on and not get distracted by all of the gestures or whatever are happening at the time.
Exactly.
All right, I have an assignment. We're going to go to a break. This is the day after Christmas. Next week, it's a brand new decade. We have an opportunity for you through stories to leave a message for the people to adhere to for a brand new year. Think quick, folks. I'm coming at you right after these messages. Hilton has a lot of stories to tell. Don't you get that impression, folks?
Musical stories.
Musical stories. We're telling stories. And I had a homework assignment for them during the last break, but you wanted to say
that talk shows are another form of storytelling. There's so much interchange going on here that you have a guest, they come and tell you their story. You ask them a little bit more about them, and at the same time you're learning about them. This is
and
a
so the
wonderful
storytelling,
medium.
I never thought about it that way.
It still goes on.
Okay.
It still goes on.
1990. I think it's probably going to be the most important time in the life of African Americans. And I want us to think of some story that'll make people realize that they have their own destiny in the palm of their hands. Let's begin with you.
You know, the main thing to remember is the story never has to be told the same way twice. You can change the story around ad infinitum, which is one reason why basically when I even tell Halloween stories that I take a lot of the violence out because I don't want to put certain things on the subconscious of children to affect them. I try to put positive messages wherever I can. So a positive message thing may be, you never can tell what your thoughts will do in bringing you hate or love, because thoughts are things and their airy wings are swift as a carrier dove. They follow the law of the universe, that everything recreates its kind, and they speed over the track to bring you back whatever went out from your mind.
Whoa. And so you be careful what you do with your thoughts.
Because it's coming back. Old folks
Because
say what's going around
comes
around.
To follow up on thoughts, and this advocacy organization that writes curriculum, puts stories into curriculum and for teaching, one of their principles is your thoughts determine your actions. So you need to think about that, and also that it's not the stimulus that you experience, it's your response. So you have to have the right response and don't always react to something. Create your own response that is empowering for you.
You have a story in a minute to tell?
Sure, about that stimulus response. Yeah, the mule story was really stimulus response. You know, you get a negative stimulus, positive response. But this is a story quickly about two frogs, and they were playing along, they jumped into this pail of milk, creamy, thick milk. One gave up because he was afraid or frightened, and the other one kept saying to him, hold on, don't give up yet. Just believe that there's a way out. You may not see it, there may not be a likelihood for it, but believe it anyway. But he still gave up. He said, I can't make it. I don't think I can make it, man. Maybe his name was Leroy or Jack or something, but I can't make it, you know. And the other frog said, just tread water, man. Just hold on. Tread milk or tread water or whatever. Tread water. So he kept treading water for about 20 minutes because he knew there was a way out. Maybe the farmer will come in and catch us. Maybe a cow's tail will fall into this pail. We can catch onto it and jump out. He didn't know how, but he pressed on anyway for 20 minutes, and then what happened? He's treading water and treading water, and he was standing on butter.
Did you get that?
All right,
Oh,
that was clear.
He kept churning and churning and churning and made a way out. So perhaps as we thank our storytellers this day after Christmas, that's our message for the new year. Keep churning and churning. Or as Dr. Larry says, hang on in there, man. There's a way out. Until the next time, God bless.